In September of 2019, I sustained a TBI from a bicycle accident, and that was while wearing a helmet. And while I had time for a recovery, it wasn't necessarily restful as I was focused on my recovery and physical therapy. I was finally released from my concussion doctor's care in February of 2020. 3 weeks later, the pandemic hit, and we all know the next season would be exhausting. Constantly pivoting and making changes and adapting to the needs of the congregation and how we can be in ministry together, in person and remotely. Doing all this while navigating pastoral care in ways that are safe was a constant challenge to keep up with. And I was blessed with an already in place safe church team that began to meet weekly during the pandemic to help with details and safety decisions regarding COVID. However, it was still a lot of work. Taking vacation or study leave over those next 2 years became a challenge because of COVID-19, whether it be travel restrictions or pandemic concerns, difficulty finding pulpit supply for a Sunday off, or troubleshooting technology remotely. Becoming disconnected and getting away had been limited and was far from restful. At the time I applied for the grant, I was in my 12th year of ministry here at Fair Street. And it is overwhelming to think about, and yet I am filled with gratitude and amazement that I'm still feeling called to this place to serve and lead and live and be in ministry with this faithful community whom God loves. However, coming out of COVID prior to my clergy renewal time away, regardless of how I was feeling, I was just tired and feeling depleted. My pastoral care was suffering because of it. My routine and rhythms were completely out of whack, and I was in need of some reset, which meant that this grant and this 3-week renewal time couldn't have dropped on my desk at a more perfect time. The plan was that following our 90-day obligation with Church World Services and working to welcome and walk alongside a refugee family from Afghanistan, I would begin my 3 weeks and go entirely off the grid. I would spend 1 week in Denver at the Festival of Homiletics, and then 1 week in Arizona by the Grand Canyon and Sedona. And then the 3rd week would be split at home on the front and the backside of the travels. When I shared the plan with the consistory, they were so excited and wholeheartedly agreed that this plan was solid and vital for me and the congregation. As one elder stated, when you come back revitalized and refreshed, it energizes us. There were so many highlights from this experience. The biggest one or 2 words was timing, specifically God's timing. So one story I share is I was climbing and hiking Cathedral Rock just outside of Sedona, and I was ready to bag it and give it up as it was just so hot that day. Doubt and frustration began to settle in, and then travelers would pass by and we would talk a minute or two, and then I would just keep going. And just as I had arrived at what I thought was the top, someone said, "Oh, there's still more to go." And I didn't know if I could do it. But there was a group in front of me and we began talking, and they began talking about how amazing it would be to get married at the top of Cathedral Rock. But how in the world would they get a minister up there? And no, I didn't perform a wedding. But I did share that I was a minister, and they thought that was so cool. And as we talked, they stayed up there, and before I said my goodbyes, they asked for a prayer and a blessing. These people that I had not met and just found out that I was a minister asked me for a prayer and a blessing. So at the top of Cathedral Rock, I offered a prayer and a blessing on this couple that was about to start their life together in just a couple days. So they shared that they were supposed to be on the trailhead at 8 a.m., but for various reasons they were late. Or maybe that they were right on time so that we could meet. There are so many more stories from the 2 weeks of travel that because I was working to really be present, I could notice and I could acknowledge and savor each one. would like to say that the conference in Denver was life-changing. And well, it was good and it was life-giving. The experiences and the interactions with so many different people were the highlights for me. This was a reminder that my call is deeply embedded and woven throughout every fiber of my being. As with many pastors, some days it's life-giving and others it's just downright exhausting. But this trip was completely life-giving. And I came back rested. I didn't realize how tired I was until 2 days after returning from 2 weeks of travel. And I was still at home and I was reading and walking and reflecting on my travels. So prior to my 3-week renewal, I had started a puzzle, and out of frustration and exhaustion, I couldn't focus to keep working at it. Now, a side note is that puzzles help me process and brainstorm and troubleshoot, and they offer a space for meditation and prayer. So it might not make sense now, but then it made sense to begin another puzzle. And I couldn't finish that one either. But after returning home, rested and renewed, I finished both puzzles within 3 days. This was the first realization how wiped out I really was prior to this time away. So during this time, I discovered that I knew my limitations, knowing when I could take risks, let loose and have fun in a new land, and also know my limitations as to when I needed to hit the pause button and for my mental health and my well-being say, not today. For the entire 3 weeks, I disconnected from my email and I did not miss it at all. I turned off notifications on my phone, so I would only get phone calls and texts from my family and my closest friends. I actually bought a real camera so I wouldn't constantly be taking out my phone. I deleted the social apps off my phone. And now now a year later, I still have to remind myself to check my email if I'm not at my desk. And I've had told folks at church and colleagues that they should call or text me if they need an answer before morning. This has challenged and encouraged me to begin reframing connections and thinking through how and when to communicate with folks, pausing to be present and name God's timing in the day-to-day interactions with everyone I cross paths with. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the funding and making clergy renewal a priority. And I do hope that ministers receive and seize this opportunity for some clergy renewal and care. Take care.